What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. So much to get to today. Of course, we're going to start with Champions League action, but then we also have a U.S. men's national team roster to discuss. Greg Berhalter talked to the media. I was in that press conference after that squad got released earlier today for these two final tune-up games before the World Cup that will take place at the end of this month. So I'm going to give my thoughts on that as well as some of Greg Berhalter's reaction and what he said and sort of his explanation for why this roster ended up the way it did. But like I said, we're going to start with Champions League before we get into the U.S. men's national team. And your highlight game of Matchday 2 in the Champions League, Bayern Munich get the 2-0 win over Barcelona. Robert Lewandowski goes back to Bayern. And in a really cruel twist of fate for him, the storyline coming out of this game more than anything else is his missed chances, which is just completely uncharacteristic. I firmly believe he is the best pure goal scorer in the world and has been for a while now. And Barcelona were terrific in the first half. Unsurprisingly, he was on the receiving end of most of the chances they created. He had 2-3 really good looks and just couldn't convert them. Maybe the nerves had something to do with it and the awkwardness of playing Bayern so quickly after he left. It also might have just been one of those games. But the reality is, at halftime, Lewandowski should have had at least one goal, if not two. They were that good, they deserved those goals, and he should have finished the chances that were created. Barcelona, not as convincing after halftime, don't pose quite as much of a threat. But it's still never like Bayern got complete control of this game, or that you really felt like Bayern were imposing their will at basically any point. At least until the goals were scored. And so Lucas Hernandez opens the scoring off of a set piece. You got to do better marking him there. But again, in terms of a run of play and a sort of controlling the game standpoint, Bayern still really struggled, but they find a way to get this goal. Things change a little bit after that. Bayern were better in the second half. And they get their one moment in transition. Terrific build-up on the right side between Nassar Mouawi, Jamal Musiala, Leroy Sané. There might have been one other player involved in there. And ultimately, it's Musiala who carries the ball forward. He lays it off to Sané, who finishes really, really well to make it 2-0. And Bayern just kind of coasted more or less from there. It never felt like Barcelona were going to get that goal and get themselves back into this game. It really felt like they had to take those chances in the first half. They didn't, and that was kind of that. Which leaves you in a really interesting place in terms of what to take away from this game. Because on one hand, I am still incredibly concerned about Bayern's ceiling. I talked about this after the third straight draw in the Bundesliga. You winning at Inter with what is happening at Inter right now is not doing anything to change my mind. And this performance didn't do anything to change my mind either. I am just not convinced they can get past the quarterfinals. When they go up against the 5 or so best teams in the world, over 2 legs, I'm not convinced they can get the job done. And I also would be surprised, maybe even shocked, if Robert Lewandowski has another game like this season. Barcelona need to do it for 90 minutes, not 45. But I would not be scared if I'm Barcelona about the idea of, and of course it would take an extreme set of circumstances for a rematch to happen in the knockout stage because they're in the same group, but playing a team on Bayern's level, Barcelona are there. This team is ready to compete with at least those tier 2 teams. What I still want to find out, and what we're not going to learn for at least a little while, is can they hang with PSG? Can they hang with Manchester City? Can they hang with Real Madrid? But so far, after that really disappointing opening game, they have been fantastic. And I would argue everything they were supposed to be based on the money that was spent and the strategy that is being implemented to try and get this team out of their catastrophic financial situation. So you walk away from this game not concerned at all about status in the Champions League and getting out of this group. That's the most difficult game you're going to play. Bayern handled Inter on the road, no problem. I expect Barcelona to do the exact same thing. So you get your rematch with Bayern, you still can win this group. You certainly are still in a position to finish second. So it is really kind of strange how this all played out. And the final thing I'll say is, if you're going to pick a game for Robert Lewandowski to be that wasteful, this is a pretty good one. Like I said, no severe consequences Champions League group stage wise. And where you really don't want this to happen is in the knockout stage, right? In a quarterfinal, in a semifinal, where that kind of result can end up ending your Champions League run. Ask Ajax. That was hard to say. How that went last year, right? You just get unlucky in the wrong game. It's what makes this tournament so spectacular. So if you get that out of your system in this game, where just expectations aren't that high, it would have been terrific if you won, but there really aren't that many consequences for losing. You're going to take all of this if you're Xavi. You've got to feel really good. Big win for Bayern to just kind of get back on track. But still, over 90 minutes, I'm just not convinced they can play with these top 5 or so teams in the world. Then we go to the other high-profile matchup on Tuesday, Liverpool-Ajax. First thing that needs to be recognized here, Thiago got back in the starting lineup, and boy, did it make a difference. And then Mo Salah got on the score sheet to break the deadlock and get Liverpool a lead in this game. And those two things are incredibly important. One, it has become abundantly evident how important Thiago is to this team. You can talk about whether they should have reinforced that midfield more in the transfer window. I still think not enough credence is being given to the other midfield injuries they've dealt with. But the reality is they don't have somebody to make up for not having Thiago. And you saw it in this game. And Mo Salah has gotten off to a really slow, disappointing start. And so getting him that goal, also really, really positive. And the performance as a whole was really good. They outshot Ajax 24-3, and StatsBomb, which is the source FB Ref uses for their expected goals, has this game at 2.4 to 0.3 in favor of Liverpool in terms of expected goals. They were dominant. And still, Joel Matip needed to save them at the end from having an unlucky game they couldn't afford. Right? Sometimes you just can't put the ball in the net as many times as you deserve to. That in itself is not concerning to me. There are so many positives to take away from this performance. But the reality of the situation is this game was going to go, I would argue, maybe even 90% of the way in determining Liverpool's Champions League fate this season. Maybe that's a slight stretch, but it's not that far off. And I say that because of just how different the outlook is based on the result of this game. Right? If Liverpool don't get that second goal, and it's a draw, you are now having to catch up to both Napoli and Ajax, and you still have to go to Amsterdam. In a world where you're assuming Ajax is going to be the second team in this group and that Napoli is going to win. Not impossible, but you've got no margin for error at that point, right? You can't drop points against Rangers. You've got to win your home game against Napoli, things like that. And obviously, if you lost this game, it would be an even worse situation. But now, because they found a way to win, which they absolutely deserve to, you have put the pressure back on Ajax in terms of this group. Napoli did what they were supposed to. James Sands got a red card for Rangers. So Napoli are flying 6 points through 2 games. And so now, Liverpool get Rangers twice still, where you know there are going to be points dropped between Ajax and Napoli when they play these 2 games. And you still get Napoli at home. And all of a sudden, this looks much more manageable. This is what you would expect in an incredibly well-balanced group with 3 really, really good teams. It's by no means a guarantee Liverpool is going through. But I would argue now, Ajax is the team that has to deliver rather than Liverpool. Right? If they drop points at home against Liverpool, they're in big trouble. They drop points against Rangers, they're in big trouble. If they don't get anything away from these 2 games against Napoli, they're in big trouble. That is how dramatically this group shifted because of the single goal Joe Matip scored. We've seen, Liverpool had the 9-0 in the middle of all of these struggles and then went right back to getting blown out by Napoli and looking horrible. So I don't know what this means going forward, to be quite frank. I'm not willing to extrapolate because they've been so inconsistent and just kind of head-scratching at times. But there is something to point to say this is the beginning of a much better run from Liverpool, and that is Thiago is back, and he's in the starting lineup, and he's playing well. This was a very, very, very positive thing. If you're a Liverpool fan, if you're Jurgen Klopp, you've got to feel really good about this. They needed this win. They showed up. Absolutely deserved to get it. It was a little more stressful than it should have been based on the balance of play. But in the end, they get it done. And now Champions League looks quite different for them as well as for Ajax. Third game I want to talk about here individually before we get into some bigger takeaways after the break. Manchester City, Borussia Dortmund. This was your highest profile game on Wednesday, and of course features Erling Haaland against his former team. Not the prettiest game you're ever going to see. And ultimately, this is a Manchester City win. But I want to focus more on what actually happened in this game and what it could mean for Borussia Dortmund moving forward. Because whether Manchester City lost, drew, or won this game, they're going to go to the knockout stage. And they're going to be the favorites, probably, heading into the knockout. When you get to the round of 16, the consequences are not severe here. Ultimately, they do get the win. But Borussia Dortmund held Manchester City to 3 shots on target. One of them came from Julian Alvarez, who came on for the last half hour or so, I think it was. So he played a decent amount of minutes, but the point being, one of those shots on target came from a substitute. The other 2 were John Stones' ridiculous rocket out of nowhere to equalize, and Erling Haaland's incredible winner. Those were the 3 shots on goal Manchester City had in this game. I can't tell you the last time I've seen a defensive performance from Borussia Dortmund like that. What they were able to do for 70, 75 minutes in this game, and really all 90, they gave up 2 incredible goals. We'll get to the goals in a second, but there's really nothing you can do about either of them, probably. This is the first evidence I've been able to point to as to why I still think they have a chance to win the Bundesliga with how much Bayern are struggling. I'm not convinced they can do this enough to actually win, but that team that showed up in Manchester can give Bayern a run for their money. That defensive unit was so much better. There was no chaos back there. They weren't giving up big chance after big chance. There weren't players running free. It was a terrific defensive performance. And then Jude Bellingham, kind of a fortunate series of events, but great reaction to just get that ball redirected, and all of a sudden you're winning. And then John Stones does, well, non-John Stones like things and scores the goal of his life, which then sets the stage for what Erling Haaland did. Now, if you want to poke a hole in Dortmund's defense, yeah, you probably should get out to João Cancelo. It's easy for that cross to get lost because of what Haaland did. But he put that ball in there with the outside of his foot, and it was gorgeous. However, he put that ball in the middle of the 3 Dortmund center backs that were at that point on the field. And Haaland found a way to get to it and to put it on target. I mean, this guy is... I've been saying this from the very beginning. He's remarkable. I've never seen a player who defies physics the way he does. It just doesn't make sense that somebody his size can do the things he can do. But he is that fast. He is that physically gifted. He is that flexible. All of those things. And so I come away feeling really good about Dortmund. But at the same time, this is a Dortmund team that just got ripped apart by Leipzig. So you got to do it at week in and week out. And that's always been their problem. And it's been the problem so far this season. On Manchester City's side, the only thing I want to add here is this game was played at a level and sort of had the feel of a quarterfinal or a semifinal or something. Not a lot of chances. 2 teams that are absolutely capable of getting that far in the tournament. Not a lot between them. Small margins. Right? These are the kind of games Manchester City sometimes have really struggled in. And the criticism always comes when plan A doesn't work, when they don't have control, and Dortmund are one of those teams that thrives in chaos. And so it's not sort of this clinical, systematic game that Pep wants to play. Right? That is where you've seen Manchester City come up short in the Champions League. And this game does not guarantee anything moving forward, obviously. But I said this in the preview, and I will continue to harp on it, and it will be the reason, barring something unforeseen, I will pick Manchester City to win this competition this season. It's because Erling Haaland can do that. Right? He wasn't really involved in the game. He doesn't need to be. They weren't creating an awful lot. It was just kind of blah. But that one moment from João Cancelo and then from Erling Haaland, there's not another team in the world, there's probably not another 2 players in the world that can combine for a goal like that. But Manchester City has a plan B. It has nothing to do with tactics, nothing to do with Pep changing his approach. It is simply they have a striker who can do that. And that reality could make all the difference in the world on those few occasions and that one matchup where things just aren't clicking and they can't sort of systematically break a team down. That one barrier they need to get over to actually win this tournament. If Erling Haaland can do what he did in this game at that moment, that could be the missing ingredient for this team. Because I will not continue to say or continue to pick this team to win this tournament when the evidence suggests what they have had in the past is not enough. The way they're playing is not enough to actually win the whole thing. I talk about this all the time. For me to believe something's going to change, I need to have something different to point to. Erling Haaland is more than enough different for me to point to. So I'm going to ride this Manchester City team unless they give me reason not to. And I don't expect that to happen. Okay, that is Champions League Part 1. We're going to take a quick break. when we get back. Some more quick Champions League reaction for the other stuff that went on in Matchday 2. And then a breakdown of this U.S. men's national team roster and my thoughts along with what Greg Berhalter had to say. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Wanted to also take a couple minutes to talk about some of the other Champions League results from Matchday 2. We already talked about the biggest matchups, but a couple other ones of note. Chelsea, Graham Potter's first game, it's a draw with Red Bull Salzburg. Chelsea had 4 shots on target. One of them was Raheem Sterling's goal. The other 3 came from Hakim Ziyech, who played just over 13 minutes. The offense is going to be a work in progress. But I will forever back Graham Potter's ability to take that group of players and turn them into an improved version of what he got out of Brighton's team that, quite frankly, I didn't understand why people thought they were able to play a more attractive brand of soccer when they let go Chris Hughton, and boy was I wrong about that. If Graham Potter can do that, Graham Potter can turn this thing around. It's just going to take some time. The most interesting decision Graham Potter made was to leave both of his new center backs on the bench. So his back line was Cucurella, Thiago Silva, Cesar Azpilicueta, and Reece James. I expect it to be a back four moving forward. That's what Graham Potter kind of has always done. And so it is worth pointing out, Salzburg's goal came on a passage of play that was not great for either of the 2 players in the center back position. And I say that because, to me, Cesar Azpilicueta is not a center back. You got Thiago Silva just misses the ball out wide, and Azpilicueta is trying to cover, but he gets beat to the spot, and there's your goal. I am curious what Graham Potter's thinking was there. He could have a very good reason. This might just be a one-time thing where he's trying to get things organized, and he wants Reece James and Azpilicueta on the field, and that's the easiest way to do it if you're going to play a back four. I just wonder if Wesley Fofana gets across and prevents that goal from happening. That's all. There's plenty of work to do. Knew that before. It's not going to change after one game. On the Red Bull Salzburg side of things, I said this before we started, and when I was previewing the groups, I said this after they got the draw against AC Milan, and it is coming to fruition. They are a sneaky, dangerous third team in a group, and if somebody doesn't show up, they're going to take one of these 2 spots. And so here they are. They got draws against the 2 big clubs in this group. They're ahead of Chelsea, and they're 2 points behind AC Milan, heading into their 2 games against Dynamo Zagreb. If they beat Zagreb twice, they don't have much work left to do to finish in the top 2 of this group and go through. Now, yes, that work has to be done against AC Milan and Chelsea at the back end. But these 2 teams are going to play, again, they're going to play each other twice, AC Milan and Chelsea here, so there's going to be more drop points. If Red Bull Salzburg can get Zagreb twice, they are in an outstanding position, and the pressure is mounting very quickly on Chelsea. Sort of in that same Liverpool vein. Little bit different, but the idea is still the same, that because of this group and the way things are playing out and sort of the schedule, these first couple games are becoming incredibly important unless something unexpected happens down the line. These first couple games could end up deciding this group. There is time to turn things around, but Salzburg are in a terrific position 2 games in. Speaking of similar to Liverpool, Juventus was also facing one of those games against another one of the most difficult third teams in the group in Benfica. Right? One of these games where you lose to PSG, not a big deal. But you have this game, and if you don't win this game, you're in big trouble. Juventus score in the 4th minute, and then concede twice and lose to Benfica at home. When Liverpool got the win they needed, Juventus did the opposite. They have not won a game in any competition since August. And they have an incredible mountain to climb here if they're going to get out of this group. Benfica have looked really good. PSG, shouts to Maccabi Haifa. Terrific performance. Went up a goal. Shout out to U.S. goalie Josh Cohen. Made some big-time saves one-on-one against that front line. I will continue to wonder if PSG can ever win this tournament without getting any kind of defensive work from their front three. Right? Even against Maccabi Haifa, it was just an up-and-down game. It's not like PSG played poorly. Mbappe had a one-on-one. Neymar had a one-on-one. They ended up scoring 3 goals. Mbappe absolutely destroyed somebody on one of those transition moments. Just completely sat him down. But they didn't do the defensive work. They didn't cover the ground, and so they gave up chances too. And Maccabi Haifa, to their credit, were up for it and took advantage of some of them. The larger point here is Max Allegri said from the beginning, the games against Benfica are the big ones. I wouldn't have said that if I was him, but he's right, and they lost the home one. This is becoming, and it's so strange with Juventus, because even looking sort of back at my weekly top 25 and wondering how I still have them where I do, they've been around with the same group as Atletico Madrid, who have been up and down, Borussia Dortmund up and down. I'm not going to put Marseille ahead of them, at least until this next set of top 25 rankings I do. None of it has been disastrous enough. It's a lot of draws. It's not losses. But this is becoming a major problem, and I'm very, very quickly cooling on the optimism I had after the first few games. Specifically the first 2. Max Allegri's got to start worrying about his job here. It's that bad, and they're quickly losing ground in Serie A, and could very, very well end up in the Europa League. And that is not what he was brought in to do, because they were, not even at that point with Andrea Pirlo. This might end up being a new low. They could turn it around. I haven't given up hope that they will, but yikes. And then finally, I want to talk about Group B. This is so strange. Congrats, Sporting Lisbon. 6 points through 2 games. Knock off Tottenham. Top of the group. We'll see if it lasts. But at least they're in really good position to get themselves into the Europa League, at the very least. And Marseille, my goodness, simply cannot perform in the Champions League to save their lives. This is one of those things I just can't explain. It doesn't seem to matter what season it is, what the circumstances are. They're doing great in Ligue 1. They're a really good team. Had a nice run in Europe last season. But for whatever reason, when they play in the Champions League, it is always disastrous, and they're off to another disastrous start in a group where they should finish second. And time is running out really quickly for them to turn this around. They could still have a great season domestically, but you got to show up on the biggest stage, or it's hard for me to take you seriously as a top 15 team in the world. It's a mental hurdle I have with them right now. Can I put them any higher than 17th or 18th on my top 25? And this was set up for Marseille. 100% set up for Marseille to go through. And at this point, you have to be even okay with making the Europa League considering the start you had. That is all for Champions League this week, onto the U.S. men's national team squad for these final 2 tune-up games before the World Cup. The first thing I want to say here, whether you agree with Greg Berhalter's approach or think it is the stupidest thing you've ever heard, you at least have to give him credit for having a vision, knowing what he wants, and sticking with it. There is logical reasoning behind the decisions he is making. Again, you may disagree, but all you can ask for is that there is a why. It's one of my big things in life. Defining the why. Because I feel like so often people just kind of do things without thinking, and decisions are made without looking at the bigger picture and having a real intentional purpose behind it. Greg Berhalter knows exactly what he is doing and what he wants. I don't entirely agree with it, but it is very clear he has a plan and he is going to stick to that plan. And that's what made this roster really interesting, is because of sort of the way the schedules have played out, the limited games leading up to this World Cup, I feel like this is the first opportunity, and also the final opportunity, he had to sort of change direction and open his pool back up to include some guys who 5, 6, 12 months ago would not have been in the picture. Specifically looking at you, Brandon Vasquez, Tim Ream, for example, Jordy Mihailovic. We'll talk about more about him in a little while. Right, there are some guys who haven't really gotten an opportunity with this group. And they could have been included in this roster. Whether they were going to make the World Cup squad or not, having them in here in place of some sort of tried and true veterans who you know what you're going to get out of, and then you evaluate, you see how they do in camp, and then make your final decisions for the roster. But Greg Berhalter didn't do that. He knows what he wants in his strikers, he knows what he wants in his center backs, and that is what he is sticking with. So a couple key takeaways I had from what Greg Berhalter actually said when speaking to the media and explaining this roster. Number one, he said on multiple occasions, this roster is not set. And I believe him. Do not assume that because somebody is included on this, that means they are essentially a lock to go to Qatar. Now, I also believe, and Greg Berhalter essentially said as much, that 80% of the roster is decided at this point, barring some sort of incredible change or unfortunate injury in the next couple months. And you also have, Jedi Robinson, Tim Moya, who are missing out on this through injury, who are going to be on that roster, assuming they're available. So that is part of it, is don't put too much stock in the players that were chosen and the players that weren't. Second, John Brooks is not making this team. Greg Berhalter went on a list in his opening statement of sort of the other guys he was really considering. He listed 5 center backs not included in this camp and did not mention John Brooks. Now, Tim Ream was one of those players who was mentioned, which goes back to the center back point and Greg Berhalter knowing what he wants. He said, the things we ask our center backs to do are not Tim Ream's strengths. And then he said, Tim Ream's playing great. He's captaining a team that's playing well in the Premier League. He does have a lot to offer. He reads the game really well. There are certainly skills he has. But Greg Berhalter wants to press high and he wants to leave space behind his center backs, and that is not Tim Ream. And it is also not John Brooks. So that was one interesting thing that kind of might have flown under the radar about all this is, and maybe Berhalter just forgot him. I find that hard to believe. He had specific points he was making about all these guys he didn't call into this camp. And he didn't talk about John Brooks one bit. So I think we can put that one to bed. My other takeaway, Jordan Pefok has a chance to make this roster. and actually go to the World Cup. Brandon Vasquez doesn't. What Berhalter said about PFOC was really interesting to me. He said, we feel like we know exactly what Jordan offers. We didn't need to see him again. And then somebody asked about the decision to bring Ricardo Pepi and sort of said, is part of the thought process to give him a bit of confidence and try and get him going again with the struggles he's had club-wise. Now he's got his loan to the Eredivisie. He should be playing consistently. It's looking good so far. And Greg Berhalter said, yes, that was part of the thought process was he played an important role during qualifying. He had the struggles in the Bundesliga. So we wanted to give him this opportunity to kind of get rolling again now that he's got a better club situation. And so I put those two things together and said, I do think there's a chance, and combining those two things also with Greg Berhalter's insistence, this roster is not set. And I took all of that to mean Jordan Pefok has a real chance. Jordan Pefok is not Greg Berhalter's preferred style of striker. And it's fair to bring Josh Sargent after the form he's been in. He scored another goal today. But I see a world in which Berhalter ends up choosing two of Jesus Ferreira, who is going to go, Pepi and Sargent, and brings Pefok as a third option, probably not as a starter in any of the games, but something different off the bench, a physical presence, right? Just a different type of striker, because I would be a little bit wary of bringing three guys who are more or less the same player. So I absolutely see a world in which that happens. But Berhalter likes Ricardo Pepi. And he loves Jesus Ferreira, and rightfully so. I expect Ferreira to be the starter on this team based on what Berhalter was saying today. But again, plenty can change in the next couple months here. Those were the big things I took away from Berhalter's discussion and his explanation as to kind of why this roster is the way it is, why these players got left out, why these players were included. The other couple thoughts I want to throw out there that are just mine about this team. Of the players who did make it, I'm really excited to see what Sam Vines can do without Jedi Robinson being available. Sam Vines has been playing phenomenally. He is a left-footed left back. The U.S. doesn't have any of those outside of Jedi Robinson. And Greg Berhalter even said, yeah, we looked at it, and we decided the best option was to just bring a bunch of right-footers who can play on the left side, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. But Serginho Dest, Joe Scally are both guys who could, and I fully expect one of them is going to be playing on the left side at some point in these two games. There is no third left-footed left back option, which makes Sam Vines a very, very interesting question and sort of person to throw into this conversation about the final squad. Because Jedi Robinson's going to be the starter. But there is kind of this trickle-down effect depending on whether Sam Vines makes this team or not. Because if he does, and you have Serginho Dest, that probably means Joe Scally's a no, because you've still got Shaq Moore, DeAndre Yedlin, and Reggie Cannon who can play on the right. And then you have two guys who can play on the left, plus Serginho Dest, who's also capable of playing on that side. If Sam Vines doesn't perform so well, one of those right backs might be sacrificed to bring Joe Scally, so you have Robinson, Dest, and Scally who can play on the left. That's just me speculating, throwing that out there, but it is a position I am concerned about, that backup left back spot. And Sam Vines is a guy who hasn't really gotten a chance with this group of players against high-level competition to prove himself. I am looking forward to seeing what he's got, and hopefully he plays well. Club form, he's been terrific, and he slots right in there as a guy you feel comfortable with playing in an emergency if for some reason Jedi Robinson can't go. Other couple things in terms of guys who got left off. Jordy Mihailovic was not part of the conversation in the press conference. I will continue to go to bat for him. And I am somewhat frustrated by this. Simply because, and this is the one issue I have with Berhalter's logic. Okay, I get the idea of we don't need to see Jordan Pifak again. We understand what he is. We'll make our decision about whether we want that to be part of the team going to Qatar or not. I got no issue with that whatsoever. But if you're going to dismiss Pifak for that reason, do you need to see Paul Arriola again? I'm not picking on him in particular. I'm just throwing a name out there. And it's a little bit more difficult for Brandon Vasquez, who is the other guy I really wanted to see on this roster. Because Josh Sargent hasn't been in the picture for a while, Ricardo Pepi hasn't been in the picture for a while. And there's a real chance Ricardo Pepi ends up being that second guy. And so there is real value to bringing him into this squad. I see what Berhalter is doing there. I have no issue with the even though I would pick Pifak and have him on my team going to Qatar. I have no issue with Berhalter saying, for this window, I want to see Pepi again. I want to get him back into the swing of things. So it's just difficult because you have two guys at the striker position who Berhalter wants to see that haven't been around for a little while, which makes it much more difficult to then find a spot for Brandon Vasquez because they were never going to bring four strikers. And you're not going to leave Jesus Ferreira off this team. Where you had more flexibility was in the midfield and on the wing. You got Malik Tillman in there. You got Paul Arriola in there. Seen some people frustrated Jordan Morris is in there. I'm pro Jordan Morris. So that's not where I would have gone. But I would have loved. I just don't understand what happened from Jordy Mihailovic getting called into the camp he missed because he had to pull out of because of injury. And now, to make him not part of this conversation. The explanation I can come up with that would be consistent, and it applies to Brandon Vasquez as well, is that Berhalter is putting an incredible value on the group he has seen and sort of his ability to understand what they offer and their ability to understand what he wants from them. Right? If you look at this squad, the guys who got left out are the guys who haven't gotten in. You can have your own opinion about whether that's right or wrong. But that is what happened here. I probably would have done things a little bit differently. But at the end, there is a logical series of thoughts you can have and a logical explanation you can come to about why this all played out the way it did. And if you're a U.S. men's national team fan, you have to feel good about that. There is a plan. Berhalter knows what he wants. And at the end of the day, that's all you can really ask for. So we'll see what this team does. We'll see how they line up. Who gets the opportunities at left back? Who gets the opportunities at striker? What these guys look like. And I will say one more time, I really believe Greg Berhalter when he says this team is not set in stone. And it's not just because players may get injured and he doesn't have everybody available for this camp. I still firmly believe the last 3 or 4 spots on this team are up for grabs. One of the goalkeeper spots, and also it's the impression I got from what Berhalter said was the decision was, let's get Zach Steffen healthy, where he's just starting to sort of work his way back. So there's no need to, and again, he's a guy, you know exactly what you're getting for better or worse. So there was no need to bring him into this camp. So that's another, right? You're picking the goalkeeper, at least one of the final goalkeepers, potentially one of the center back spots, one of the striker spots, the last 1 or 2 winger / midfield spots, however you want to categorize them, between your Jordan Morrises, your Christian Roldans, your Paul Arriolas, that group of guys. So there still are some some spots up for grabs. I really, really do believe that. We'll see how it plays out, but that is what I took away from what Greg Berhalter said and sort of my thoughts on some of the players who got excluded. Okay, we're going to take one more break. When we come back, we're going to end the show the same way as always. Weekend look ahead, taking a look at the biggest matchups around the globe this weekend. We'll be right back. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. Thanks so much for hanging out tonight. It is time for the weekend look ahead. Starting in England, the Premier League is back for the most part. Still some games postponed this weekend due to the policing and logistical challenges surrounding everything going on with the Queen's funeral and celebration of life and all of that. But games we do have, the ones I'm looking at in particular, Manchester City at Wolves. City have already dropped some points, obviously. Haven't lost, but Wolves Molineux always a tricky place to play. Coming off a not so great performance in the Champions League, although they won. Does Manchester City kick it up a gear, or do we make this title race even more interesting? Leicester at Tottenham. Tottenham, you got to keep pace with your not so friends Arsenal, as well as Manchester City. And also Spurs, coming off a bad loss, have not played particularly well despite the fact their record looks really good and they're right there near the top of the table. Can they start putting together good performances? And on the Leicester side, is this Brendan Rodgers' last game? Certainly not picking them to win this one. And you got an international break that gives you a little bit of time to sort of get things recycled and reset with a new manager. Or is this Brendan Rodgers pulling off another one of those tactical master classes and winning a game he's not supposed to and saving his job? This one has a lot of interesting storylines potentially. Arsenal at those two both on Saturday. Arsenal at Brentford on Sunday. Arsenal, what do you do after you lost? Are they going to do that thing where they have these patches where they lose games, plural, in a row? That was their issue last season. You can go back and look, all their losses were sort of bunched together. Or are they going to be able to bounce back from one loss that's not a huge deal and get back in the win column with 3 points against Brentford? And then West Ham and Everton on Sunday. West Ham really starting to finally pick things up. Everton, every home game is big when you're in a relegation battle. Goodison Park, tough place to play. Some interesting things going on there as well. In Spain, Sevilla at Villarreal on Sunday. Sevilla really struggling across the board. Villarreal trying to sort of keep pace with the top teams in La Liga and find a way to get into next season's Champions League. And then your big one of the weekend, Real Madrid at Atletico Madrid on Sunday. Real Madrid still sitting there perfect. Only team in the 5 major leagues in Europe. Of course, this is one of your more difficult games on the schedule. Atleti, up and down so far. Nearly 2 disastrous Champions League performances. They find a way to get the first win at home and then lose the second. It's just sort of hard to tell what you're going to get from that team game in and game out at this point. Italy, 2 really, really good games involving the 3 teams at the top of the table. Atalanta at Roma Sunday. Napoli at AC Milan Sunday. Terrific, terrific day in Serie A there. The table will look much different after this weekend because all these teams at or near the top are going to be playing each other. In Germany, Schalke at Dortmund, the return of this terrific rivalry. Dortmund coming off this great performance against Manchester City. Got to get 3 points here. But it's also one of those tricky rivalry games where sometimes weird things happen. And then Bayern at Augsburg, that's also on Saturday. Can Bayern finally get a Bundesliga win? And I also want to throw this in here, RB Leipzig at Borussia Mönchengladbach on Saturday. Two of the more talented teams in the league. Leipzig looked really good. Lose to Real Madrid. No shame there. Can they keep this thing going as they reboot with a new manager? And Borussia Mönchengladbach, can you sort of continue to build and cement yourself as one of the top teams in this league? Because you've got some stiff competition, at least in Union Berlin and maybe in Freiburg too. France, one game, PSG at Lyon. PSG have basically played every good team in this league, save Marseille so far. Hasn't been much of a challenge yet, but this is another tricky test for them. And then MLS. We got a Hudson River Derby on Saturday, Nashville at Austin on Saturday, Portland at Columbus on Sunday. Hudson River Derby is just notable for that game and both teams struggling a little bit, particularly NYCFC. I said when Ronnie Daiwa left, I need to see them actually be able to continue this because I'm not sure he's getting the credit he deserves. I didn't think it would be this bad. And also, losing Todd Castellanos certainly has to do with these recent struggles as well, but it has fallen apart pretty quickly for NYCFC there. Nashville, Austin, one of your more informed teams in the league, and Nashville really surging ahead of the playoffs. They went from being right at that playoff line to trying to get themselves a home playoff game real quick there. And at Portland at Columbus, this is your big sort of playoff game of the weekend. Both teams right there trying to hang on to playoff spots, trying to make sure they end up on the right side of the line. And then NWSL, two games to mention here. Angel City at San Diego Wave on Saturday. And then Portland Thorns at Kansas City Current on Sunday. This is your third place team facing your first place team. Kansas City Current sort of came out of nowhere on this terrific run. And this was a team that kind of had their season derailed very, very early with those injuries to Lynn Williams and Sam Mewis. And yet, here they are, top of the table. Just don't lose anymore. So, phenomenal turnaround for them. That's a really good matchup. They will be at home. That game is Sunday against the Portland Thorns. That is all for Touchline, the Touchline Talk show this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and check out all of the written content on Substack, as well as Medium now, slowly but adding stuff to Medium over these next couple months in the lead up to the World Cup. That is all for the Touchline Talk show. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.